Well, hello. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jen. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Doing good. So, we kind of decided since we went down kind of the estate talk, we might as well continue that conversation today.
Yes, I think we touched on the importance of estate planning when we were putting together an emergency binder, but I feel like a lot of people don't know exactly what a estate plan is and what it entails, and so we wanted to get into a little bit more details about that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also state that neither one of us are estate planners.
Yep.
Neither one of us are estate lawyers. um,
Mhm.
it is very specific from state to state,
Yep.
different rules. So it is imperative to have an estate attorney that works alongside your financial professionals, both
Yes.
your day to day financial professional and then more in your realm of retirement, life insurance, and all of that. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. They all work hand in hand together. It is a very symbiotic relationship, but yes, we don't handle any of the creation of the documents or estate plans, but we do, once those are established, utilize those in different ways that we'll talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now that we got those semantics out of the way, um, this falls mostly in your area, but there are a few things that I can talk about from the day to day standpoint.
Mhm.
So we're just going to go for it here. When you're estate planning, kind of the first step in my mind that you want to do is take a good inventory of your assets. And an
Mhm.
asset are things like homes, land, real estate, vehicles, any collectibles that you might have, like coins, art, antiques, trading cards, any other personal possessions that have value to it. Just not, I mean, everything, like if Aunt Susie collects these very rare Barbies, that needs to go as part of the estate. And those are more your tangible assets, the assets that you can physically touch. Then we've also got some intangible assets, the things that you can't really touch. And those are like bank accounts, savings accounts, CDs, stocks, bonds, mutual funds,
Mhm.
life insurance policies, retirement plans, health savings account, ownerships in business, anything else on the inventory list you can think of?
I can't really think of anything. That's a good list of intangibles for sure.
Okay. All right. And then so you get this list and you may have to sit for a while to come up with everything. I mean, this isn't like a 10-minute process. You kind of remember as you're jotting stuff down, you're like, "Oh yeah," while you're folding clothes, you might go, "Oh yeah, I have that piece of property over and." But this is a good time to be thinking of it because our property taxes are coming in, things of that. So good reminders will be coming in here shortly.
Yep.
um, so the next step would be to account for your family needs. And that's where you get into the wills, the life insurance, naming guardians for your children. So I'll let you kind of take over on that realm.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you hear of an
Mhm.
estate plan is actually an a combination of documents that allows for different things that someone wants to designate to people, whether it's their wishes or designations or things of that nature. So one of the most popular things you hear about anytime you talk about an estate plan is a will. And
Mhm.
a will is a document that everyone needs, not just people who are rich.
No.
But it's this it's so basically the will is the wishes of an individual, so what they want their property to be distributed to.
Mhm.
And we just talked about what property is, and it's tangible, intangible. How do they want all of those assets to be divvied up after they pass?
Mhm.
With just a will, that usually goes through probate, which is a court system of basically a judge looking through the will, trying to determine, is there anyone that feels like this will is can be contested, are there issues, whatever else. It could be a lengthy process and an expensive one. So
Mhm.
something that estate lawyers usually recommend to avoid the probate process is something called a trust. And what a trust is it's actually all of your estate plan inside of something that protects it from going through probate and from a
Mhm.
couple of other different things. So it can help limit estate taxes, legal challenges. It can protect a lot of those assets within that trust, and whatever the wishes are of the will and the trust will be carried out with any kind of like long court hassles. So when you hear will and trust, they're different. One is a document, the other one is creating a place for all of those assets to go into.
Yeah,
Another document. So go ahead.
so something, the way that I describe it in like the
Mm-hmm.
accounting realm is when you die, your estate becomes almost its own individual.
Yes.
So while you are living, your trust becomes not a living, but it's like a corporation. It has its own
Mm-hmm.
tax ID number. It encompasses everything in your estate. And what I do want to warn people is there's a tax return that goes along with a trust. I mean, it is its own entity. It's like a, not a person. It's hard
Yep.
to call it a person, but it is a legal formed body that has to be reported to the IRS. So that's why it's very important to get the right professionals involved if this is the route you're going to go.
Yes, absolutely. And again, that's why it's important to use estate lawyers and people who are, legally allowed to put these kind of things together. I know there's a popularity in using some online, legal services. I've heard of LegalZoom, I've heard of Rocket Lawyer, all of this stuff. Those can be utilized to create basic wills, basic kind of powers of attorney. You can't create any kind of trusts or anything on there. And um, it also is not as protective as if you speak to someone, a professional, who can then tell you, based on your particular situation, exactly what kind of documents and things that you need in order to have a complete estate plan. So it is always important to speak to someone who can individually gather from your experience and your situation what needs to be provided for sure.
Okay, so we've got
So
the will. Then
yep.
what do we do next?
So another important thing that is what we consider like a living document is a durable power of attorney. So what a power of attorney is that it's a document that um, drafts a person that you assign to act on your behalf when you cannot do so yourself. So generally speaking, you hear about this a lot when someone becomes mentally incompetent, or even if they become medically incapacitated. And
Mhm.
this allows that person to be able to transact real estate, enter financial transactions, make legal decisions on the behalf of you. And this is something that I personally have experience with. I am my grandmother's power of attorney because she currently is going through dementia. So she designated me to be the person to make sure that all of her finances were in order, her bills were getting paid, that her investments are invested appropriately, all of those kind of things. And it is nothing to take lightly. So it needs to be a conversation between both parties before that person is designated, because it is very much a serious job, one not to take lightly, and one someone should be prepared for, because it does take a lot of time and other things to be a power of attorney, particularly when it comes time for them, if they are not mentally there, or if they're incapacitated in some way. So again, we talked about the conversations in our last webinar about how important it was to talk about these things. Making sure that you're choosing a power of attorney is definitely a conversation you want to have.
Yes. Don't surprise the person.
No, no, way too much work goes into it for them to be surprised.
Right. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got the will, we've got
And then
the
another
policy.
living
Mhm.
another living document that we also need to think about the health aspect. So like the power of attorney, a lot of that is just the financial aspect, real estate, bills, investments, you name it else. But what about the health aspect of it? If someone is incapacitated and they want their wishes to be known, they need to have a healthcare power of attorney, which is separate. And usually that designates a spouse or a family member to make important healthcare decisions on the behalf of them in the event of incapacity. So again, you should have a conversation, pick someone you trust, and someone that will actually either make a course of action you would agree with, or will actually see through what your desires are after becoming incapacitated. We've seen too
Yes.
many times, even in the news, of how the parents are on one side, the spouse is on another. There wasn't that power of attorney in place, or there was contesting of it, and you want to avoid that at all costs, because at the end of the day, you want your wishes to be realized.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Great. That's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Anything
And
else
then
legal wise while you're living?
so while you're living, um, you do want to make sure that if you're not establishing a trust, making sure that at least you're designating beneficiaries on all the accounts that matter. So that's life insurance, that is retirement accounts. You can even do it on some bank accounts. Anything that you want to pass on to other individuals, and hopefully avoid the probate process, you would want to make sure that you have beneficiaries down. It can be a spouse, it can be children, or if you do have a trust available, it can be your trust. Your trust should have all of your assets in them, and all of those assets should have a beneficiary being the trust. So when something happens to you, all of it goes into one place, and that is how then the trust is paid out however it needs to pay out. And again, all of those things are protected.
Yeah, and I just thought of this. I live in Texas, and we're a common law state. So
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that automatically everything would transfer to the surviving spouse,
Mm-hmm.
even without a will. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not true.
Yeah.
So if even people that do not have children, a will and all of these documents that we're speaking of is important, regardless if you have children, don't have children, don't have this large estate that you hear everybody talk about. All of these documents are imperative for everyone. Everyone.
Yes, and that's a great mention of why it's important to work with a estate lawyer, because
Mhm.
they will know what the laws are in the state that you live in,
Mhm.
and the kind of considerations you need to think about when putting a plan together.
Mhm.
Because like you said, there are a lot of assumptions that people say, well, if I'm married to this person, all of it goes to me. But we have seen too many times there's a
Yeah.
lot of contesting on the behalf of the family, or
Mhm.
maybe a second family, or whatever else. Like, it can get very can get very expensive and very prolonged, and you want to
And
avoid that at all
ugly.
costs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So what
And
else?
and then you mentioned it, children. You
Yeah.
know, if you have minor children, what do you want to happen to them if something happens to either one of you or both of you if you're with a partner? And
Mm-hmm.
something that's very important is to designate a guardian for your
Mm-hmm.
children.
Mm-hmm.
This extremely important that you have a conversation with who you choose as the guardian for your children,
Yes.
because that also is a huge responsibility. They are essentially saying that they agreed to take your children and be legal guardians of them until they reach the age of majority. And so making sure that you know someone that shares your views, is financially sound, is willing to raise children,
Mm-hmm.
is appropriate for something like that. Again, we don't want to think about these things. We certainly
No.
never want to think about leaving our children behind, but it is so important that you choose who your children go to and not the court. And
Right.
so if you don't, they could become wards of the state if there's no family to be there to take care of them. They could get into foster care or any of those things, and you want to
Mm-hmm.
avoid that at all costs. So having a guardian designation for your children is extremely important.
Yeah, and for those of us that do have like investments and things of that nature, you then can decide when that child can cash it in or use it. And I mean, you can
Mm-hmm.
set your parameters around that. That's why it's so important to have these conversations and documents in place, because I mean, we never know, right? We never know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And particularly if any assets are being left behind to minor children, there needs to be, processes and designations in place to decide when they can have access to said
Mhm.
assets. They
Right.
can't take ownership of them until they're at least 18, but maybe that's too young at some point
Mhm.
for, life insurance proceeds or a house or whatever else. And so all of
Right.
those kind of wants and desires of the individual need to be considered in something like that. There's also another document that's not a legal document in the sense of part of the estate plan, but is related to the estate plan that a lot of people don't know about. And it's called a letter of intent. And what the
Mm.
letter of intent is it's a letter that you leave behind to your either, power of attorney, the executor or beneficiary of your estate. And it is where you define what you want to be done with particular assets after your death or incapacitation. So the will is basically who gets what, but maybe you want to say what should happen to some of the things after they go to who they're going to. And this can also
Mhm.
include funeral details or other special requests that they might have after they pass.
Right.
It can be used to help a probate judge know of the deceased intentions and might be an easier way to help in the distribution of assets. But it also will just be beneficial for the executor to know so that
Yes.
they have the final wishes of the person and know, outside of the estate, what needs to happen, what kind of funeral arrangements do they want? Is there any other like little things that aren't necessarily part of the estate plan that they want to be distributed or taken care of in some way?
Man, that's some great advice. I had forgotten all about that letter of intent.
I
That's
know.
fantastic, right? Yeah, and
Yeah.
are there any other documents that you can think of, or is that about all of them?
those those are the main ones. Obviously everyone's situation is different, so
Yeah.
depending on the assets or the situation, the estate lawyer is going to be the best bet for that,
Mhm.
particularly if you're a business owner. I know that
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that goes into what happens to your business after someone
Right.
passes or becomes incapacitated. There are certain
Mhm.
documents that can help with the distribution of that. But for the main estate plan, those are the general documents that are needed.
Okay, and the only other thing that I can think of, along with your inventory, you will also need to list out any of your debts and any additional information that you can include on that. And anytime you do something like you have a life event, maybe you decide to buy a lake house or
Mm-hmm.
a vacation property, that then also needs to either go into your trust or into your, anytime you make any changes to your assets, sell assets, that's another thing, then
Mm-hmm.
your will and all these documents need to also be updated for any of those events as well.
Yeah, especially when it comes to marriage, divorce, birth of children, um, all of those
Adopting.
things,
Mhm.
adopting,
Yeah.
those documents need to be updated to represent the most recent desires of who gets what and whatever else. I've come across a lot of different people who have gotten divorced, but their estate planning documents still say everything goes to their ex-husband or their ex-wife. And if
Yeah.
that's no longer your desire, if you want everything to go to your children instead or to something else, you need to make sure that those documents are updated after the finalization of something like that, so that if something happens to you, it doesn't
Mhm.
fall to the wrong people if that's not what you want.
Right. So this seems to be like a good time of year. We're kind of bringing the year down. We're getting into the holiday season. This is a good time to really sit down and look at what documents you have, maybe just glance over them, pick up the phone, call your estate attorney, say, hey, we need to, go through this, make sure I've got everything. This is just a good trigger time of year when we start thinking of family and our loved ones to review all of these types of documents that are there to protect you and your family. I mean, it's really for
Mm-hmm.
both of you.
It really is. And as we mentioned in our last webinar, the holidays in particular, like the Thanksgiving dinner table or Christmas around the tree, is not the time to have these discussions. It can be
Yeah.
very stressful time for family members. They could be entertaining, they could be visiting, anything like that. But you do want to bring the topic up and find an appropriate time where everyone can sit down and have these conversations. So whether it's after the holidays, make sure that you sit down with who you're going to designate as the guardian of your children, or who you're going to put down as your power of attorney, or the
Mhm.
executor of the will if they are someone different. But making sure these people know they're being designated to take on these tasks if something happens to you, so they can be prepared, because each of these tasks and each of these designations has their own set of responsibilities and very legal and important implications that each party should be aware of before they agree to it. So
Always good stuff.
yes, always
Okay.
good, always important.
Well, I think that's all we have for everybody this week, but
Yeah.
we'll be back next week. I'm sure we'll have something fun to talk about next week too, right?
Oh yeah, always do.
Well, it's always good to see you. It's always my Wednesday that I get to figure out what I need to get done on my financial side.
Yes, I enjoy our conversations together, and I hope everyone, gets something very valuable out of this, and hopefully puts a plan together to meet with an estate lawyer or talk to their family or do something in the
Mhm.
future to help prepare their family.
Yeah. Okay. Well, until next Wednesday. Bye, everyone.
Bye.